In this one, oh, thank you. I don't know who got me on that, but I was about to fail my duties. Thank you, Ayana. Woo, all right. So this is kind of just an open session a little bit to actually ask some, to get y'all's questions, because we didn't have enough time to go into questions during that awesome organizers roundtable. Wanted to see if any questions popped up, and you could say them out loud or pop them into the chat. But any questions that came up about how to organize a People's Movement Assembly? What is it? What type of, what is it? What do you need to be able to do one, to be able to organize one? So this is kind of an open discussion. So I want to get questions first, and just see what we're looking at, and then also see what kind of lessons we would share with each other about the People's Movement Assembly. And as we're thinking about questions, I might just introduce, screen share really quickly. Let's see, let me get it ready. The People's Movement Assembly Handbook, just so folks can see that there's a really great resource that can help us kind of move through this, and that offers a lot of case studies, a lot of examples, which I think are really helpful to the organizing process, right? So getting a sense of where assemblies have happened over time in different eras, in different parts of the world, how to do and organize a People's Movement Assembly, sort of this before, during, and after plan that really requires that sort of cycle of organizing. And then tips and tools. And so we just want to start there, and even, use some of these definitions about what do we mean by governance, and this decision-making process that we're coming together to do. That's heavy. So we don't mean government and the state, but we do mean leadership and decision-making and problem solving. And that's what we do as organizers. So that's not difficult. Convergence is a word we use, like when we pull people together, not just to come together to an event, but to come together to share that analysis, that vision, what we're doing together, what we're working on in our own spots, all of that. And we use these other words too a lot, frontline. And what we mean by that is where we contend with power. And the definition of frontline is that sort of most important or influential position in the field. And in a movement undertaking, that's where we battle for power. That's where the folks who live and work on those front lines have the most knowledge about what's happening on those front lines. And so that's why the Assembly really prioritizes frontline folks and communities to be organized into these spaces of governance. And then social movement is this coordinated collective force that's moving together with principles and procedures and shared vision. So those are just a few kind of quick introduction words and ways that we use the People's Movement Assembly. And also just want to open it up to my co-facilitator, Ayana, and see if we can get some questions from you all about how to do this. What are you thinking about? What do you need to be able to organize a People's Movement Assembly this year? But Ayana, first, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, just really quick. I know I've introduced myself before, but for folks who are just joining in, my name is Ayana Clemens. I use she, her pronouns. I am based here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, land of the Muskogee, Yuchi, and Cherokee peoples. And I'm also one of the staff organizers for the Southern Movement Assembly. But more so, my experience with the People's Movement Assembly process comes from being a member of my home organization, Concerned Citizens for Justice, which we had the amazing opportunity of hosting SMA 6 here in Chattanooga. So if you were there, I was there, and happy to be back in the space with y'all. But yeah, any questions regarding the process in general, or anything that you've heard today that kind of stood out for you that you want to know a little bit more about?
I have a question about logistics. So I'm not sure if this is the same room as the BDA.
No, so we can put you there. No problem. Let's see. Let me just do that really quick. I'll just move you right to it.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, is anyone in the wrong room? We can move you right over, no problem at all. No hard feelings. Process for keeping folks engaged. Awesome. And then I see Erica, your hand's up. What is the process for keeping, let's get a couple questions and then talk to each other and share lessons. Erica, what's your question?
Yeah, so my question is kind of in environmental justice, which is the space of the work, there are multi-pronged issues that are connected. How can we leverage this opportunity to have people come together where we're working on more than one issue that's all kind of connected? So for example, here in Atlanta, with the Clean Energy Advisory Board work of the highest, most vulnerable communities.
I think they left to go walk their dog.
We are really doing some amazing work, but we want to connect it to affordable housing. And we know that affordable housing is connected to food injustice here. And so just any suggestions around when you're dealing in a kind of multi-sectorial issue like environmental justice, what's the best way to leverage the use of a PMA?
Awesome. Great question. Let me get Stuart and then Nitsa, and then let's do a round of kind of response with each other. And so at the end, and I see Monica's in the chat, how to bring it up with people in your community neighborhood. How do you connect people to this? And that's a great question too. Stuart.
Yeah, well, the previous question was great and something I'd like to learn more about. But sort of related to that is to what extent can a PMA represent groups as opposed to individuals?
Mm-hmm.
Individuals, I can see how that would work so well, but when you have groups, let's say local movement organizations, can they join a PMA, and on what basis, in terms of, do they have to agree to, I'm sure they have to agree to the decision-making process of the PMA, but do they have to agree to a certain decision-making process in their own group? Because groups can be large, they can be small, they could even be top-down. I mean, is it possible for a top-down group, which I wouldn't really want to see, but would it be possible for a top-down group to, or just a group where decisions aren't really made from the bottom?
Excellent question. And that's really clear. And the Southern Movement Assembly really represents so many different types of organizations. And we really respect the self-determination of each organization to run it how they run it. But when we come together, yes, we agree on the decision-making process. So that's a really great question. Let's get more into it. Let me get Nitsa and then, oh no, that was a mistake. Okay, gotcha. So yeah, so just to kick it off, I mean, a process for keeping people engaged. So just ideas that you all might have. One thing that I heard Nina say was that everybody has a role. And that's definitely an organizing, strategy and tactic, right? To not just invite people to participate and sit there, but to really create roles for people to commit to. So when they're coming back, they're bringing the food, or they're bringing the music, or they're thinking about 2 more people that they can engage, that there's something that everybody is doing, right? So that was just a thought from the round table to answer that question. But what are other ideas about how to keep people engaged as we do this? Because it is a cycle. We are in that. Yeah, Shafi.
I think that every person needs to, or every organization or person needs to also feel that there is a need, a specific need that they have that is being addressed. Whether it's, so you're always looking for commonalities. What is the fundamental commonality that each of the groups are struggling around? And then finding concrete ways that helps groups address that, either to be able to use by that one organization or by the group as a whole, and how they see the group being able to support them.
That's great.
So I would throw those 2 things out and reinforce also on that other question that Stuart raised, is the strength of the assembly process is the recognition of the sovereignty, the self-determination of every organization that is a part of it. And also there's the emphasis on organizations rather than individuals, because we really value in movement building the issue of accountability and accountability to a base, being responsible for a base. If I'm just representing myself, hey, I can talk anything, I can come out with anything. It doesn't matter, you know, whether it's grounded in anybody else's needs or it just be completely out my head. You know, I can just say anything. Whereas if I'm accountable, then, you know, there's some processes going through. And some folks who, you know, like, I think you kind of off on that one. Like, where did you get that from? Or who is that addressing? So I just, and that, yeah.
Oh, that's huge. And that's, you know, yeah, go ahead. Sure.
No, I just really appreciate that. I mean, that's just music to my ears.
Yeah, I think one common agreement is that we believe in collective work, you know, and that we're not in individualized sort of opinions. Now we can bring in individuals and figure out where folks can play different types of roles, and definitely within our principles. Two principles of unity that really reflect your question, I think, are that we respect the autonomy of organizations and assemblies. So like similar to what the Lucha folk were speaking to, like if there's a section or an assembly in Birmingham or of the workers or of young people in Arkansas or whatever, that assembly then is also respected as a collective accountable group. And that's a part of where we're moving and visioning, as we also have formed organizations. Some are C3s, some are not. Some are small community groups, some are really large trade unions, like the National Nurses United is an anchor with the Southern Movement Assembly. That's humongous, and so forth. So that's really a really great question. Any other thoughts about just the process for keeping folks engaged? I see Amini in the chat, like there's a cycle of burnout. There's a cycle of getting tired. And this is an ongoing process. How do we, and to Monica's question, like, how do we invite people into a process and give them roles and have community ownership of the process that's not going to end, that doesn't have an end date, and not burn out? So that is a golden organizing question. And so just want to throw it back out to the room. What do y'all think? What are ways that you've seen that we can do that better and differently, and with a little bit more space and support for each other? And to Shafia's point, like, are people getting what they need? So how are we balancing out that small piece of like, I'm actually getting some problem solved when I come to these meetings. I'm not just like spin around in circles, and I'm part of this coordinated, larger, bigger movement process. That's a tough balance, but super important. If we're not I mean, that's a Southern organizing tactic. Like, we got to feed our people. They got to at least walk out with dinner, like, and not feel like they came and then they're just leaving hungry. You know, so this is totally, how do we build that in? And that to me is also part of cultural organizing. It's not mysterious. It's fried chicken or whatever, or the fish fries, or the, you know, it's a plate. And that's a very specific sort of way to at least address a very specific daily need, and show that we care about people's bodies, people's health, people's well-being. Wendy, I saw your emoji, but I didn't see what kind it was. Were you want to jump in?
It was an amen, clap it up. Well, know me, I am perpetually reminding us to hydrate and take naps. I think that modeling, because some of us have been taught by our veterans who didn't necessarily model self-care because they didn't have many choices in doing that. And now that we have a little more space, and hopefully are in a better place work-wise, that we can actually model asking for what we need, taking rest as needed. And when you're in a formation, being really honest. I know with SMA, I'm with the SMA Governance Council, and I'm like, oh, you know, August, I got to tap out. And when you're in a formation, then people can tap in when you have to tap out. So one of those things, I think that modeling the behavior that we want others to have, having people hold you accountable, because my team is real quick to say, you hadn't had your nap today. So, but asking for what you need, and then just making sure that you are being very realistic about how you can move at this moment in time, and knowing that that might change.
I need somebody to tell me I haven't had my nap. I need that.
I got you. I got you.
Awesome. Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, y'all. Well, let's dive into Erica's question, because it's a heavy one and it's a good one for the People's Movement Assembly. It's really designed for exactly that, right? Like if there's a lot of folks working on environmental justice or climate, let's say in Atlanta, there might be specific areas of work that people are doing on water, on land, on energy, on farming. You know, there might be all kinds of things that people are working on. How do we work the PMA process or work the organizing process to really deal with that? Because it's different. There's a lot going on there. So how could we, what are ideas or lessons that y'all have learned in different arenas, different front lines maybe, but has that similar sort of feel? Like if we really all are under the same front line, but there's specific areas that we need to focus on. What ways have you seen work to address that or coordinate?
First question. Is there do you have a listing of all of the organizations who are doing that general area of work?
Okay.
And an assessment of what arena of environmental justice are they engaged in? And you're looking for, again, commonalities such that at least one level of pairing organizations who are doing the same kinds of work, who can be supportive of one another. That's the first, one of the first.
That's huge, Shafia. And there's several steps even in what you just said, right? Like first, who's out there? And what are they doing? What are the groups that are doing environmental work? What are they looking like? Where are they at? How are they run? And then like, where are they at in a power? Like, what are they up to and what are they interested in? What are their principles? And then are they willing to come together? Is there something we could find some commonality around? So there's multiple steps to that mapping that you just described, Shafia, that makes total sense before you pull everybody together. That's the other thing. Like there's steps to get to the PMA. And I want to come back to Monica's question of how do you go and invite when nobody's ever heard of this? Like what's the first step there? Like, and it might be doing some of that mapping, or if we're interested in XYZ, let's come together. I heard Nina say as well, like there was a planning team. There was a few people that got together to think about that question. How are we going to take, what is the invitation? And they figured it out. It's like, we're going to go get young people. We're the only ones in the room. We want to go find our counterparts and go bring them in. That's right. So what are other thoughts about, based on what Shafi was saying and all of that, ways to bring people to a PMA? What are the steps we need to take to build towards that more successful coordination across, right? Yeah, Nitsa.
So we started organizing through what we call a summit, which is sort of like an assembly. Women, feminist and non-feminist, but in the movement, and organizations that are in the past summit that focus on migration issues. And we wanted to create a room, a dialogue with women about why are they leaving the countries of origin? What are they doing to stay and to be all right? And what do we need to do together to fight corruption and violence and everything that is going on in the countries of origin, and also, when they come here. And it was an amazing opportunity. What we did was to do a mapping of organizations and invite them to the table. But we also didn't just invite it, we were in the midst of COVID, right? But we didn't only invited the leaders of these organizations, but we visited communities. We went to dialogue with women in indigenous communities and Afro-descent communities, and rural communities, to talk and to dialogue and to seek their knowledge and understanding of what's happening. And it was an amazing experience. Because what we have done is to keep them in working groups or working circles in the areas that they're already organized, to keep on building, slowly building a movement. So we are at the first stage. We're coming now to the second dialogue to talk about women in economic justice and climate change and technologies, because one of the big issues that we have is the issues of lands and territories and the struggles for keeping the lands and women to have a place and room. So this is what we are also in the midst of mapping for the second meeting. But the idea is that the movements, the first and the second groups, they all meet together and we find the intersectionalities of our struggles to keep on building a transnational movement of women.
That's huge. That's beautiful. There's a lot in there. And he said, can I ask where you're based and what organization you're with?
So I'm in Washington, DC.
Okay.
The organization is Latinas en Poder, but we are not just in DC, we're in the metro area, but also in New York and in Florida, Miami, Orlando. We're groups from different groups, but also the women that we work with transnationally in Mexico and Central America and Puerto Rico are also part of this movement building, which is we are in the startup, and I am really amazed about the work that you do, and I wanted to listen and to be part of it and see how we can engage, and together we can continue doing this kind of work.
Excellent. So glad to have you and to meet you. And it sounds like we're doing a lot of parallel sort of that convergence and gathering. And I hope it's coming through that the Southern Movement Assembly is super informed by the global movements. And so we would love to learn more from you all and connect. But I heard a lot of lessons in there, and hopefully we can pull them forward. Thank you for sharing all of that. And just that the one lesson I heard was what you needed to be able to pull folks together the first time, and then what was possible the next time. It sounded in the second dialogue, even deeper intersections could surface, and that feels important. Like just to Erica's question, sometimes you can't get to all those connections in the first drop. You got to do that mapping, see where folks are at in that second and third meeting or assembly is going to go deeper. So that's super helpful.
If I can add
Sure.
a little bit of something that we found that has clicked for everyone is to discuss spiritualities, and that has really been like the connection between all of us.
Wow.
Indigenous and Afro descents and folks that are Christians and Catholic and from different ways of dealing with spirituality, and those that have not that, but they do it in a different way, and that has been like the connecting piece of it. So it is that I think that's there's a beauty in exploring intersectionalities that sometimes we don't take into account, because, we don't want to like, oh, it can be uncomfortable for some, but, for our surprise, that was, like the big connection, and it still is.
Super interesting. Yeah. That's beautiful. And that relates to Amani's question just around burnout too. Like if we're grounding more in our spiritualities and sharing that with each other, that's huge. Let me get Miss Diana.
Hi.
Hi.
I've downloaded the handbook. Unfortunately, I have not had time to actually read it. So I guess first let me say that I really thought I was coming to PMA 101, and it seems like PMA 303. Because it seems like, you're so far ahead, and I'm trying to find out actually what it is. And I actually attended the World Social Forum, and I appreciated what Trap said, is because we do a lot of this. We just don't name it, right? PMA. But I liked the PMA because for me, in terms of the radical tradition of Black organizing, I like the term peoples, because for me, it just appears that locally, we can't seem to bring people together and stay together, because we're all working on various and separate issues. And everybody is working, everybody is working on their own things. Our own thing for us is the connectivity of all of it. And what are the root causes? And what are the problems? And what is the power analysis? And so that's what we want to do the PMA around. And unfortunately, I'm getting a little stuck in that with hearing. So again, maybe I do really need to read the book the handbook that I've downloaded, so that I can move out of PMA 101, because I really don't feel like I'm in PMA 101. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. That's real. And we were joking that it might be more of a Q&A rather than a 101. But let's back up for a second, and because it is really true, Ms. Deanna, that, I mean, we've been doing, and Black radical tradition and Southern organizing does use the People's Movement Assembly process all the time. And what we said at the beginning, kind of just that 1, 2, 3 punch. What's the problem? What are our visions? And what is the strategy to get us there? That is the basic format of any PMA that we're talking about, whether it's super small in our neighborhoods or super big and cross-border. It still is rooted in those same 3 questions, sort of an analysis, that power analysis, which is what is the problem, and you can, wherever your folks are at, ask it whatever way they need it, You could list all the problems, you could talk about the root causes, you could do a power analysis, you could do a mapping. All of that fits in that number 1. And that number 2 is the hard part, because we get stuck in number 1 all the time, right? Like we get stuck in just naming all the problems, all the terrible things, right? But that second piece of vision and solutions, that's where governance really comes to bear, right? And that's sort of like what we're so, I would say, frustrated by the government and electoral politics sometimes, is because we're not getting to policy solutions. We're just resisting the worst of the worst coming at us all the time. So in some ways, it's like taking that back and saying, in that number 2, that vision, how do we say and shape what we want our communities to look like? And then in that number 3, we got to get to the strategy. How do we make that vision real? Do we need to go do an action, do a protest? Do we need to feel the power in our bodies? Do we need to come together and do more study? Do we need to, what are the steps to take? Because we're always going to be moving in all 3 of those. But I just wanted to do that kind of 101 moment. That's the zoom out breakdown, and people being at the very center, like you're saying. And that's very much Black radical tradition Southern organizing. Who are your people? Who are you accountable to? Who is facing the worst of the oppressive forces and knows the most about what the community needs? So I just want to open it up to other folks, especially for this question of just like, what are the basics of a PMA? How are we already doing it? And how do you all, what are tools that you use in the 1, 2, 3? Because y'all might have tools or tips. How do we get into the problem in a way that's useful? How do we get to the vision? How do we get to the strategy? Oh, love it, Janae. Thank you.
And thanks, Steph. I just also want to name, Miss Diana, that, you know, that is a type of assembly, what you're talking about. That could be aimed towards community governance. You know, if you're getting folks in your local area together that are, you know, talking about different front lines. And if that's the end goal, that could be one of the types of assemblies that you organize. And there's the frontline assembly that's also possible. And then the larger one where you combine both front lines and all communities together, such as our big gathering for SMA. So just to name that there, you're right on track, you know, right on track.
Jaffe, you coming in? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that knowing your quote unquote, know your audience, know who are the people that you are talking with, and that will also impact defining what the problem is. For example, and how much time you also have to give folks to vent on what is the problem. Because if you have a neighborhood group or several folks who are at the neighborhood level and their concern is neighborhood issues, and then you have other folks who are, you know, doing political organizing or something, you may have different answers to what the problem is. And so you need to know who it is, you know, is coming out, or who you've targeted, number one, and then thinking through about helping to go through the process of defining the problem. And sometimes that's not going to take a minute. That may take a big minute. I'll give an example. The National Black Liberation Movement Unity Initiative process that is going on now is dealing with organizations who already defined themselves as part of the Black Liberation Movement. Well, it was a lot of people who've been out there for a long time, and there were people who were coming in. And so there was a long time where folks just, on and on and on. It was like excruciatingly painful to keep getting stuck on not only what the problem was, but of course I have all the answers to the problem, right? No, I have all the answers, right? And so finally, you know, the whole thing of, yeah, okay, we got that. Now what is the practical stuff, and where do we want to go? And sometimes you'll even get different answers for that. And so I would just also want to throw out that Project South, the most concrete way I've seen folks have helped dealing with local organizers, if that's what you want, dealing with in concretizing vision, was to pull out either an imaginary or physical sketch pads and draw a picture of what kind of world that you want, and list out the things and have people talk about what it is. And that helps people define what they want to do. So sometimes it's like also taking the, you know, who are you dealing with? How are they defining their process? Giving time for venting, while also keeping vision in front, and vision and concrete work. And sometimes it takes longer than other times. So sis, you're asking the right questions. You know, you probably further along than you really think you are, than you think you are. And so I just want to throw out those kinds of thoughts about how do you taking time to deal with one step, and the next step or things that we learned. And y'all, I may be on my way over there. So you're on the phone. I've shifted over to the phone. Okay. So I'm going to go out on mute and everything.
Sweet. Thanks, Shafi. No, that's great. And that definitely using popular education tools like Shafi is talking about, thinking about how people can draw it out. We use also like index cards where you got land and government and schools and, all of the different sort of components of society. And we map out, we push it around, people can play with it, move it around. And that's the consciousness, that's what it is. And then we move them all around and show what the vision, what is the world that we want it to, how do we want the arrangement of power to be? So we're using the same components, but we can move them around and see the difference between how it is and how we want it to be, and then how to literally walk across the room to get from one to the other. So you're using different, for folks that don't read a lot about power analysis, but have a lot to say about how the schools should be, and so forth. So how do we use those pop ed tools and so forth? Awesome, y'all. So we've got it looks like about 6 minutes in this session, and just really grateful for everybody coming in and bringing these questions. I want to make sure, are there other questions? Are there other lessons that you all want to share from experiences doing People's Movement Assemblies? And Erica, I want to make sure, are you on stack, or is your hand did it get stuck?
Yeah, no, I had my hand back
up.
up.
Great. Okay, great.
And it was really great to hear the last speaker bring up some realities of once you get all of the players in the room, some of the issues that may come up around the work. And I was just curious to know any kind of conflict resolution as we are gathering, and to really move more towards a collaborative space versus kind of, this is my idea and I'm gonna hold on to it and nobody can come and step on, versus, it's gonna take all of us to get us out of this, right? And so just any recommendations when you bring the powerful people who have been doing this work together.
Great question.
Yeah.
Excellent question. And so one thing I will say, the Facilitation 101 that is happening concurrently right now, all of this is recorded and will be shared. And I think they will have some tips and tricks about that specifically. But also, I just want to offer it back up to the room. And Ayanna, if you want to kick us off, just with like, what are some tactics and strategies to deal with conflict and sometimes how ego shows up, or how sort of people get stuck in their one sort of position. And the PMA is definitely a collaborative process. So how do we get there?
Yeah, there are times where I feel like this is practiced really well, and times where I feel like we're all still learning how to do this. But going in, I think agreements on how you're going to move in and out the space, especially that initial kind of planning space with folks that are, probably just now meeting each other or have worked with each other for a long time, setting up just some community agreements. And then always naming that alignment is the key goal here, right? We all want to be aligned around a particular issue or something that we're wanting to fight back in the sake of our community. And trust me, there are going to be times where folks have their different opinions, and there's going to be some back and forth. But to bring it back to what Sister Shafia said, it's, and what Nitsa brought up, don't be afraid to phase things out. If things are getting a little too heavy, allow folks to process. Maybe in between those times, you're giving, different resources to help bring in that sense of alignment. Maybe it's just their lack of acknowledgement around a particular topic, or, whatever's at hand that's causing, whoever it is to have some kind of conflict or disagreement. But definitely phase it out. And also, make time for relationship building. That helps with trust, and that helps also hearing each other and being willing to learn from one another. So that's what I'll offer, but just want to make space for others who may have experienced that in your local areas. What were ways that you moved through that?
Honestly, for me, it was about me. I learned to step back and to allow other people to grow. And out of that, I can say, I've built some relationships with several young people and a couple of elders who have really done that, right? And so now they are leading some processes. But that was for me. I had to look at myself.
That's awesome. Thank you for offering that. And yeah, most of the spaces where there is a little bit of conflict is when you're practicing cross-generational learning. That is to be expected, right? So thank you so much for bringing up that example. That happens. Everything else, I'm seeing some resonance in the chat. Any other offers that folks want to make around how do you deal with conflict? Stepping up and stepping back. Don't be afraid to check yourself. What else?
What do we mean by stepping back? I want to learn. What is it that you mean by stepping back?
Yeah, so, at times we can find ourselves really passionate and inspired by a particular topic, or whether it be, facilitating something. And sometimes it's good to read the room, maybe recognize, am I talking too much? Is there someone who's not talking enough that I can kind of take a moment and pause and allow for them to step up? So really just reading the room and acknowledging when you might be presenting yourself in a way that could be a little discouraging for folks, right? And saying no, saying no to things. Maybe there's someone else that hasn't stretched that skill yet that could step in.
Yeah, so a following up question is, how do we ask colleagues to think about stepping back?
Yeah.
Very skillfully. That's a tough one. Anybody successfully done that?
What was the question?
How do you tell your coworkers or folks that you're in movement spaces with to step back? Maybe there's been somebody that's been taking up space. So how do you?
Oh, flat out. Hey, it's time for you to step back. Sometimes, for yourself, no, I cannot do that. I love saying no. That's how you keep your peace and your sanity. Sometimes you just don't have the capacity to do things, and that's when you really need to reassess what's going on in your life and say no to things.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
There are times when I've just literally, I once, like I have one person kind of like me, they're constantly the mouth in the room. And what I'll do is I'll just simply bring somebody else into the conversation, right? I'll just kind of kindly and really nicely just ask someone else what they think, or do they have anything else? Do they have anything to say? And that person will, at that moment, step back.
Yeah. I noticed that more and more people are ghosting each other when they don't like something. And I have to say, I hate it. I hate when we ghost each other. And I think that's a tendency that that a lot of people are using, not to or confront or just to say no, but I think it's, to me, in my view of the world, is inappropriate, because we should be able to speak and to say yes or to say no or whatever we think is best, respectfully. And I think it's hurtful.
Right.
Thank you. Facilitation fails. Hey, y'all.
Hey, y'all.
It's good to see everybody. I know folks are coming in. Hey, Natalie, Mia. Thank you for our dance break. And more than that, designing the SMA slide, apparently. That was no
breakout rooms. I'm sorry.
Asheville, how y'all doing? I think y'all had a group together.
Hey,
Hey, awesome. Y'all are back.
yeah, we got more of us now than we had before. Can I show them?
Okay, great, great. Love to see it. Love to see
I'll
it.
have a little backyard assembly here.
Hey, awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
Very good. Hey, Zach.
Hey,
How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, good. Good to see people. Let's see. We were just kind of saying hi and introducing, saying where we're calling from, just real quick. Where y'all calling from, Isabella? Looks like y'all got a group over there too.
Hello, we are United Fort Worth from Fort Worth, Texas.
Awesome.
Hey, we spoke on the phone. It's so good to see y'all.
Good to see you.
Y'all are
Excellent.
packed. I'm loving those groups getting together, and also those chilling from home, checking in. How y'all doing?
Other folks. Yeah, Fresh Future Farm, where are y'all at? I love all this Houston, man. Look at y'all, Texas. This is
I know,
awesome.
right? Texas come through rolling deep.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. We see y'all. Awesome.
And we got Arkansas in the house. We got Decarcerate and Hot Springs.
Awesome. We got Atlanta.
So,
That's okay. Diana, that is okay. That's fine.
are you calling Donald from Antigua?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. We're global now.
That's amazing. Wow. Love it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Fantastic. Awesome. Kentucky. All right. Nashville People's Budget. Okay. I know y'all got something to say. So this is great. So we'll just jump into gear, y'all. And I'm gonna do what I should have done the first time and just do the quick 101. We'll share the PMA organizing handbook, which is a way to just kind of dive into the resource. Idaho. All right. Sorry. You're calling in. All right. We're all over the map. This is great, y'all. And Ayanna and I are just going to co-facilitate really kind of an open discussion about the People's Movement Assembly, questions and answers, what y'all are seeing on the ground. And we just wanted to kick it off with just a little bit of the basics. And for us, that's kind of the 1, 2, 3. That's the naming the problem. So bringing folks together and mapping out what are we up against, who's benefiting, who's at risk, what is our assessment of the ground, what are the root causes of these problems. So that's a whole lot. And that's why some assemblies can be several days, that might be a whole couple hours right there. Because then you move into the vision, and that's the harder part. So what do we want? What are our solutions? What are ideas for how we want to arrange power and relationships and communications and just the community governance part of this? And then the third is the strategy. Oh, great. Yeah, we'll pop you in. If you're in the wrong room, no problem. We'll pop you over. And the third is strategy. How do we get there? What are our steps? What are the actions we want to take to get that vision manifested and realized? So I'll toss it to Ayanna if there's other pieces just to that general understanding of a People's Movement Assembly, just to kick us off, and then let's open it up for questions. Oh, Isabella, I'll move Isabella.
Okay. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, so just the short and sweet, and I just want to kind of name some of the questions that were coming up from folks in our last session is, how do you describe this? And I just want to name that it can be disguised. You don't have to label it as a People's Movement Assembly, but the essence of getting folks together to talk about what's happening either in their community, either in a local area, regional level, however you want to name it, talk about what's happening, really dig deep and find out what those solutions are. And then, like Steph said, coming up with a strategy. How are you going to implement that? And then making commitments. And then just also want to name that it's important around this to have alignment, right? The Southern Movement Assembly, as we mentioned in our last session, uses the principles of unity. That way it's able to guide us and that we're accountable to what we're, aiming to do in the space together. So just want to open it up to see if there's any questions around the process itself, those 3 points that we just named. Are there any questions around that? Naming our problems, coming up with solutions, and then building plans to implement strategies. Any questions around the process?
I have a question around how do you get multiple, how do you get the multitude of it all? Because so for example, I'm trying to host one around combating anti-trans and queer legislation, but we know that takes multiple, there'll be some people who are going to be creating policy, and there's some people who's going to be showing up and lobbying. How do we but there also will be people who will just be on the ground organizing people to, at protests and rallies. Y'all have advice on how to get the multitude of all the things that are needed?
Great question. Yeah, that's a great question, Natalie, and it came up in the last session too. And it's sort of, that's exactly what the PMA is built for in a lot of ways, right? So you're calling together all the folks who are trying to contend with or working to contend with the anti-trans legislation. You might even break up the assembly itself into, if you already know, and that's the best way to go into a PMA, right? That who's coming, they're prepared, they're coming in, we're going after these state by state, y'all, or we're just going to the streets, y'all, or we're going to do deeper education in the schools, y'all, for real. If you know that, then you could design your PMA with those 5 strategies in place, right? So you're not arguing about them, you're embracing them and giving space to each, and then creating one action plan that really incorporates all of it, right? But how you frame it and then how you facilitate and organize that. I'm doing weird hand motions, but hopefully it's making sense, because it's kind of classic in some ways. We were talking about environmental justice in the last session. Some people are working on water, some people are doing farm work, this, that, and the third. So, but what's bringing us all together? What does everybody need? And why, and how can we learn from each other? What's going on at the state capitol needs to inform our street battles, right? But we might be playing different roles. So making sure that there's also space at the beginning when you're doing that, what are the problems, that we're really giving space to hear. Where is this showing up? Where are we under attack? So then we're also splitting up in those ways in terms of the visions and the solutions and towards these different strategies with all of that information, because that's what to me makes it about a movement versus just information, or a conference where we're just kind of coming together, finding each other, which can also be good. But the movement assembly process really allows us to learn from each other and then apply those lessons to our strategies. And thanks, Ayanna, for putting those 1, 2, 3 in there. And it's just that basic problems, visions, strategy. This is great. But just wanted to go into that question because I think oftentimes that, we get paused, but really it's perfectly, we're perfectly, set up to coordinate across. And that's a big piece of it. Other questions or things that come up in your organizing around just pulling folks together and getting towards the assemblies. And like Ayanna said, we can use different names for this thing. I think there is some power to naming the assembly and connecting to each other. And wherever you're at in your organizing, do what you need to do to meet your folks. That's what's up.
Right.
Hey, this is Andrew from
Yeah.
Nashville People's Budget Coalition.
Awesome.
Thanks
Okay.
for having us. I've got a handful of questions. I'll just start with one for now. I may have kind of missed this between the lines. Well, first of all, we've done a handful of kind of smaller PMAs over the last couple of years, and we kind of have had a regrouping and rest period, and we're going to kind of start up again soon and looking at doing some like wider PMAs with larger group, like a wider net of folks, as opposed to smaller, more aligned kind of group. And so one question is around how to think about who we're trying to get to come. I know I've seen language of delegation. There's also the question for me of like, are invites, or could or should invites be primarily for organizations with particular bases who then bring a delegation of people from their org and their base, or maybe that's part of the same thing? Or is it outreach primarily to individuals, door to door, people in the neighborhood? Or is there a model where it's both? And how do you kind of think about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's throw it. No, I mean, I don't know if you want to take it for a second, then let's throw it to the room too.
Yeah, I want to open up to see if anyone maybe has anything to offer to that question, and then I'll flow in if not. Question, how do we decide who to recruit, invite, and organize with to the People's Movement Assembly? So I know one step that we've used, and I also heard folks offer in our previous session, is community mapping, right? Listing out who's doing the work. Maybe it's by front lines, what front lines are they doing it under, but really laying out who do we have connections to, especially with your initial people that you're working with, who do they have connections to, and really just laying that out. And then Nita brought up, digging into phasing out relationship building, right? Maybe it's going to those folks that you've named out, talking with them, finding out where they are as far as, capacity, because that's one, it's going to take a commitment to plan it out, right? And then you want people to follow through. But also just naming, like, what are y'all seeing happening on the ground in our community? And really finding that interest. Is this something that you'd like to be a part of? But first, just really naming it out, doing some deep community mapping. Anything else that folks want to offer? Oh, go ahead, Natalina.
No, and I'm glad you said community mapping. Because I was like, at first, I was like, just invite all your friends who you've been organizing with these last few years, or whatever that looks. That's kind of silly. I'm also part of it. And what I thought of when you said community mapping is particularly then like being able to identify the gaps. And then like, those are the people who you probably should be canvassing for. If you're like, oh, there isn't any of these like middle class folks who like are impacted by the minimum wage, like the Fight for 15 movement. And there's no one there who's actually in that like class range. Then using community mapping as a way to like dig into the gaps. And those are the people that I would be canvassing for. But you might already find out that you have all the other folks you need to know.
Mm-hmm. And I heard potentially different types of assemblies you were organizing towards, that there might be some door knocking neighborhood assemblies to do a particular kind of thing. It's really about the goal. What's your purpose? Who needs to be there to fill that purpose? If you're trying to do something that really gets to everybody across the board in Asheville, it might be organizations, and are a little bit of both, but the purpose is going to drive that recruitment strategy, right? And who you feel like, and this is part of the assessment that y'all are talking about, who has the political will, both individuals and organizations, to keep it going, which gets us to the question that Layla put into the to the chat. Yeah, I'm sorry, Asheville, y'all can hit that, but I might've got that wrong, sorry. But Layla's question about what makes a PMA different from other visioning planning events. And so one thing, we would say is, you can do visioning, you can do planning anywhere all the time for sure. I think what makes it different, and it might not be all that different like we're saying, but is it an organizing process that folks are going to continually play a role in governing? And that's going to take time. So it doesn't mean like you do one PMA and the answer is yes or no. It's going to take a process of building over time. But are we building a collective force of, when we're building a PMA around contending with the anti-trans legislation, probably inside of that PMA is going to be a process of trans-led collective force in the South growing power together. because they're building with each other. There's relationship building happening. There's strategic planning happening. There's like all that sort of, you know, and all of us together and sending delegates to the Southern Movement Assembly from an assembly like that, then also provides this level of accountability. So that's the other answer to the other side of that question, is these events don't happen in isolation. So these PMAs don't happen by themselves, even though they can be very powerful and still get a lot done. And let's do it. Like, let's still commit to action. Let's make that happen in our communities, but let's tie those to each other and build towards the Southern Movement Assembly 10, where we can represent those assemblies and make sure the whole region knows what we're doing and why. But want to throw Layla's question too out to the room, and the chat's awesome. And am I getting towards it? And do other folks have ideas?
I just dropped that question in the chat for folks.
Oh, gotcha, Nashville. Awesome. Other questions or ideas or ways to engage, especially what kind of assemblies you might be planning? I mean, that's getting me excited, is what kind of assemblies are you planning for this summer that could then send representatives to the SMA 10?
Yeah, I'm excited to hear that as well. Please give a little teaser if you have one. What are y'all thinking about? What's kind of sparking your interest? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to jump in and say that we've been thinking about planning an affordable housing PMA here in rural Eastern Kentucky. And we're kind of concerned too with recruiting and getting individuals there, and wondering, you know, like how big it should be. And because we're in a small town, and so we would like for other people from out of town to come as well. But that's something that we've been talking about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What do you think would bring folks from out of town to y'all's spot? What would be the call in, the invitation that could work?
Oh, I don't know. Like I said, it's affordable housing. So a lot of people are really interested, and we really need that right now. So I think that would be, you know, talking about solutions for affordable housing, especially in our rural area. I think that would be the call in, but I just don't know, you know, about traveling right now.
Right, that's true too. So yeah, we're up against a lot of conditions too, y'all, and so that's why one of the other skill sessions is kind of around how to do creative Zoom calls and make them more assembly-like, even if we can't travel or it's not safe for all of our folks, or we're you know impacted by the gas prices and not able to move as easily or accessibly. So it's huge. So definitely wanting to think about how to keep, you know, don't let there be a barrier, I would say though, too, like for this summer and over the next couple of months, like even if it's a smaller gathering, go ahead and do it. Like go ahead and practice through it and build that planning team. Think about what that agenda is going to look like. Give it a shot, you know, sort of see how it feels. And see what comes out of it, you know, and like other, and Ayana was speaking to a previous comment from the other session, like it might take a couple times, and that's okay. We're growing the process. And so even in the sort of PMA basics, fundamentals, if it's not an isolated event or decision, even to itself, it's also not isolated to all the other assemblies happening. So Zach, I mean, this is awesome that Arkansas is thinking about a PMA specific to formerly incarcerated folks and other folks impacted by prisons and incarceration. There might be other PMAs like that across the South that start to build up towards SMA 10. So we want to support folks connecting after the fact. I know, Ayanna, you're involved in several different assembly processes around dealing with the 1994 crime bill. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that, and then we'll go to Donald.
Yeah, so really quick, I would love to connect and support any way we can from our experience. So along with the Southern Movement Assembly, I'm a part of anchor organization Concerned Citizens for Justice, who has partnered up with the People's Coalition for Safety and Freedom, which is kind of a national formation, I guess you would say. And so all of us were kind of in our communities. We had folks in California, we had folks in Texas, we had folks in Tennessee, such as Chattanooga. And we all kind of held People's Movement Assemblies geared towards, one, educating folks around the 1994 crime bill, but to also pull people out of that and make decisions on how we would replace that bill, right? So we had folks bringing up ideas, what should be included? And then we're going to recruit a small delegation of folks, just like how we're asking y'all for the Summer of Assemblies, to bring a delegation with those ideas. And so what we've done is we recruited 2 folks that are then going to go and design a policy that's going to be presented on the national level for us to replace the 1994 crime bill. So it was a mix of political education for our folks that have never heard from it, but also a connection to what we're seeing in our communities. We know that the 1994 crime bill was also connected to the Tennessee 1996 crime bill. And so we wanted to draw on that consciousness around that as well. And then also name the visions on what would we do if this was gone? What would we replace it with? So definitely just wanted to highlight that the People's Movement Assembly can be something that can help draft legislation, that is created like for the people and by the people. We had folks, formerly and currently incarcerated that were, participating during the People's Movement Assembly. And we also held it virtual. So that's another thing. We recognize that, hey, it was a small group of us as far as planning, and we may not be able to do it in person, but we brought folks in all across Tennessee virtual to hold this People's Movement Assembly. So really fill it out. It takes some time to build it out, but definitely lean on your strengths of the people that you're working with as well. So I also want to make space for folks to share too.
And Donald's on stack.
All right. Well, thank you, folks. Donald, GCCLP, Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. Definitely love the things I've been hearing in regards to alignment, who do you invite and stuff like that. I'm in the process of trying to think of how to create a PMA in a region that is seriously separated by water, a whole bunch of small islands. And also coming from, please ignore the party sounds in the back. That's where I got coverage. I'm sorry. One of the problems when you live in such places. But yeah, I'm in the process of thinking, how can we bring the PMA, which people in this area organize similarly, but not necessarily with the same concepts that the PMA has. And again, coming from a different colonial mentality, the structures and getting together is also, it has problems, to say the least. And some of the things that have been said here, I can definitely see how we can incorporate them, but how do you have a PMA over 7 different countries? And not, and make it worthwhile. Some of the issues that I just mentioned as well about travel and access, like me right now, I couldn't come on at the beginning. So those are some of the things that, I think are issues that would be good to sort out here. So
No, that's real. That's real, Donald. And that is a huge and amazing sort of challenge to organize globally across islands in the Caribbean, where there's so many different pieces to that. And sort of, I guess maybe the question back would be like, what would the steps be how would you step that out in terms of building towards something where if the vision is like all 7 islands or so many X number of islands talking to one another, how many PMAs or how many meetings or how many planning committees would it take to get to a common understanding, a common sort of facilitated process where people feel really a lot of ownership, so that you're getting over those barriers as you plan? Because that's I mean, there's logistical barriers, but I imagine there's probably also alignment barriers or just relationship building that has to happen to even get to some of a planning committee.
But still, I do think from what I've seen, I've only been in one PMA, which was one in Baton Rouge, and there's similarities that have happened in these areas, but the uniqueness that I found with the PMA is how can we get, if we can get people in one island who are nearby and spread it out. The alignment is already there because of the crises that we are facing and will face. So it's how to introduce a PMA style of organizing to folks who are accustomed to a kind of European top-down kind of thing. So I'm going to listen to stuff.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thanks for bringing the question. And it relates to Andrew's question in the chat too. Just there's you can do a PMA over multiple days. Like you can do a PMA in a couple hours. Like there are different forms. And so it's a very flexible form to think about and to utilize based on what you're trying to do, who you're trying to do it with, what kind of logistical possibilities you have and all of that. But the underlying principles, the underlying sort of strategy of it is in this to build towards this movement alignment, relationships, and coordinated strategies. But just want to open up to folks who maybe haven't spoken or have ideas or have questions. Miss Josephine, I saw you come onto screen. You might be muted if you're talking. I can't.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there are two things. I was listening to the something about the affordable housing. In that wise, I think one might contact the HUD, Housing Department of Housing, because they have programs for homelessness, but one has to actually call them and get to that department and get their procedure or how to do that. And if there's none in that particular area, the contact person at the housing department will give you or give us an idea of who to contact to have that established. That is in terms of the affordable housing. For the Mr. Donald, for intercontinental or countries, like the islands, because I think he said about 7 islands. I'm thinking maybe contact because the several different islands will have their different embassies, because there are some rules might be different, regulations might be different in terms of how to do things. Like here, there's freedom, you can do anything you want here. Within the law, you cannot just go to the Secretary of State in your state or go to the courthouse and find out information. But for example, I'm thinking like in Nigeria, there are rules, but there are no rules. So different countries, different islands to probably have different rules. So contacting their embassy might be able to give you an idea of what process to follow to do what. That's my thinking. So once you know the law, you cannot break, once you have the law, your guideline of, okay, this is what I want to do with my thinking fits into the model of their regulations in this place. And if it's not, then we can think, how can we go about it? Or how can we do it to fit within the framework of their regulation? Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Josephine. And can you say where you're based? I think, are you here in Clarkson?
Yeah, I'm in Atlanta, in Beaufort, with Atlanta, Georgia.
Awesome. Great. And yeah, no, and I think some of what you're speaking to too is really, it came up earlier as well, like we got to know our own terrain. We got to know our territory. We got to know where we're at. And so having more information, doing that research, Brenda Hyde with Southern Echo, a great organizer in Mississippi, brought that to us before. In terms of community organizing, you got to investigate, you got to research, you got to know the situation, know the territory, know what folks are dealing with. So you're coming in with something as organizers or the planning team or however y'all, situated. With the budget work that Andrew's talking about and Houston's talking about, like you got to know, how does a city budget work? How do we make this, how much money is coming in? How does it relate to some of this rescue plan money that's coming in? Like, how can we work with that so that it makes sense and we're rolling into the PMA with information already. So then we're going deep into vision and planning and so forth.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Just want to make space for others to talk a little bit of what you're thinking about for your People's Movement Assembly in your local area. Anything that's been shared has inspired you or you're gravitating towards what's happening in your local area. Let's see, maybe Asheville, what y'all got going on if you're free to share? What are y'all thinking?
Hello, I'm going to turn our camera on since we're about to talk. And then you can see how all of us are crowded around the backyard. Yeah, I think a big issue. Is it okay if you're I'm the one? No, I just, this is fine.
You're just like ducks.
I think like one of the big things that we are thinking about, at least I'm thinking about, I think others are as well, around Movement Assembly here in Asheville, is around housing instability, focused, I think, primarily around the ways in which homelessness is criminalized here in like increasingly intense ways. And I think as we've been thinking about it, I think something that we're wanting to try and figure out how to prioritize, because in the way we've done organizing thus far, I think the voices of people that are living on the streets are like really present, but so much of the organizing relationship building we've done has happened digitally during the pandemic. And so I think all of us are still working on the kinds of relationship building that allow to have like a movement assembly where the people that need to be there will really be there, and saying that and thinking about the people that are most affected by that. Does that sound correct, folks?
Yeah, that's great, y'all. Thank you.
I think someone else who's here wanted to say something else too. I'm going to pass the computer towards them.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
So something that's kind of been on my mind a lot listening to y'all talk and thinking about the way we do work here is, how do we avoid like nonprofit and state capture, right? Because if we're working on homelessness, there are a lot of there are like some homeless service agencies here that specifically cooperate with the cops and perpetuate that like carceral response to homelessness. And so we want to be able to, do effective community organizing work, but not get taken over by, nonprofits or by other state projects. Like, we don't want to come up with ideas that the state uses to fund more cops, right? Anybody else?
Yeah, I want to see, does anyone have an answer to that or offering? That's a great question. How do we prevent co-optation, right, of the solutions and strategies that we're coming up with? How do we keep that sacred, right, so that we can then follow through with the action plan? Any offerings around that? Being clear on principles and values on the front end can help. Yeah, definitely. And that could be as simple as community agreements within yourself, up top, everybody knows accountability. How are y'all practicing that? What else? What are some other offerings? Yeah. And I think it, for us, we've definitely experienced that. And that's always a concern when we're, doing things that the state does not want, right? Especially when we're trying to uproot these harmful systems. And it goes back to trust and relationship building too. If you know who you're working with, you got to be able to know who you're working with too. You got to build that relationship and be very intentional about that. Not only to the participants that are going to be attending and practicing in the People's Movement Assembly, but also the folks that are creating, the agendas together. What relationship do y'all have? What do you know about what they're bringing to the table? What are their strengths? And then I think, alignment is key. So if there is a group that is not aligning and that is willing to sell out our people, let's name it what it is, I wouldn't recommend that they be a part of that process, but I'm also open for others who may have experienced this. Like, how did you navigate that? And,
I wonder, I think one thing that I was going to offer too is like being very, I hate this word so much, but I'm like being clear on the, like how, like the branding of the proposals and solutions, because when you're and I think it's more about like how you talk about it. But like when you are talking about your solution, like the very first thing you talk about is like what the solution's values are like ingrained in. So like no one can do, like we can't have the solution without it being ingrained in these values. And it doesn't work if these values aren't at the forefront of it. So we can't do community policing if community policing doesn't involve like trust and like you kind of things you were kind of talking about, Ayana, in alignment. It doesn't mean they won't co-opt it, but at least you'll like be able to like when people are talking about the idea, they'll at least know that, oh, it's very critical for this idea to work. They have to have these values ingrained into them.
I think always like I'm a fan of the like go big or go home too, of like, go with the big thing to say. I think that's about the branding and stuff. It's like be clear about the like if we're saying we want to, what I think learning from the defund the police work too, about like, no, we're not talking about reform, right? Like we're talking about like literally defund the police, literally do that and put it in all of our communities' pockets, like not it doesn't mean anything else but that. And it's the big thing. I think that sometimes where things can get messy is in incrementalism, right? Again, when we're asking for incremental changes, and that doesn't mean like we don't have change that happens on a scale of progress, right? But like if we ask for the big thing outright, then it's clear, right? And those changes can happen. I think that's something actually the right is really good at doing, is asking for the big thing outright, and then they get their little things after that. And why they're so good at co-opting our stuff.
And I would say too, along with big vision, let's out organize the opposition. Like, I think when we're, it's like, we can definitely recognize co-optation as a threat, and we got to out organize them. Like, we've got to be bigger. We've got to have our people together. Like, and I don't mean like bigger in terms of money style, but really in terms of the people that are willing to support that big vision, support that idea. And move it forward and in whatever phases it needs to be able to manifest. Because sometimes we also, I think part of, and just to bring it back into, the PMA as an organizing, and to this question I see in the chat just around accountability. The PMA itself can be your accountability vehicle, where you're bringing back those ideas. We've now done a year of planning towards this big idea. Now we're implementing that big idea. Now we've got more people. Now we've lost people because of this, that, or the third. How do we regroup and reorganize? But just thinking about accountability to the purpose and vision, and to the people that are, affected by the strategy and moving it forward. So there's pieces in there that are just kind of basic organizing, but then there's also, I think, something that the PMA offers as this way, this very clear, seeable, presentable space where I can go and feel and be accountable to a group of folks that are moving something forward. And then the Southern Movement Assembly itself is the larger vehicle that we're tapped into. And that's also a part of the accountability. So we're going beyond just the naming of the big idea to implementing that big idea in multiple places around the South. That's super exciting. If y'all are kicking off something in Asheville, how are we learning about that, also organizing that, and then able to get each other's backs when some of that threat shows up? So that's another, that's going to happen. We know that. How do we plan for it? So these are really, really great examples. Other stuff in the chat, just looking. And some of that is like when we have folks coming in at different points in their own political development and the work that they do, how do we do, and we use it often, and it's an older tool, but strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The SWOT analysis is a way to at least name some of those and get folks involved in that conversation so that it's not just like, we want this, let's go get it. It's like, whoa, let's see what's all at stake here. What do we have? What are our assets? Where are our weaknesses? And also what opportunities are out there that we haven't tapped into, maybe because we're not part of that community or we haven't found them yet. But where are the real threats so that we all know them? And if surveillance is a threat, if state violence is a threat, then let's make sure if we're not just sending, young people to go to the city council meeting by themselves, like that it's just like out of nowhere. Like if they want to, great, but like let's do it. Let's support all of our folks to think about it. What do we need? What do we need? What kind of support would be helpful? What is the police presence at the city council? What's going to be out there? Are folks prepared to do this or that within an action and so forth? And like all of those pieces, like as much as we're supporting each other in solidarity and not prescribing. And that's the other thing, just to offer this. So the SWOT is certainly a tool you can always use in planning. And then just making sure, like one thing, and Layla was asking about just what makes it a PMA. It doesn't have a prescription. It's not predetermined. It's got to come, the visions and strategies got to come from the ground up. So that's a piece that's very important, but also really involves and requires a lot of that political education, support, scaffolding, and sort of accompaniment. So we've got about 5 more minutes. Just want to see if folks who haven't spoken much, if you've got any questions or ideas or burning visions about possible assemblies that you might be organizing over the summer.
And is this making sense? Like, please let us know. Is it making sense? Do we need to break it down some more? Anything? We're really excited to find out kind of what your summer assemblies are going to be. And so, yeah, thanks, y'all. Awesome.
Oh,
excellent.
awesome.
Great. We want y'all to feel prepared. Right?
That's a great indicator.
We want you to be prepared. We really do. And then at any point in time, tomorrow we're going to be practicing this, which you'll hear when we get back to the big group. But, even after this organizing intensive, if you have further questions, y'all have that organizer toolkit that has a lot of this information in there as well.
Yeah. I did have one more thing, sorry.
Yeah,
which is just which was, and I said, oh my gosh, which was, so Ayanna knows this, a lot of us and our folks that we organize with are facing felony charges connected to an art-based protest, felony littering charges. And I know that there's just a lot of people who are also facing some not like criminalizing protest charges, but in I don't mean this in a good way, like fresh ways that the state is approaching this. So I'm curious and interested in what it would mean to like get those of us who are facing these charges and in communities where the cops are doing some pretty clearly using the same playbook kind of stuff to get us connected and thinking together about what it would mean to really actively prepare for and resist this, especially how to get younger organizers. Like this was Ayana's idea or Ayana's point, like really aware of aware of like the threats that are maybe different than us older organizers faced in doing direct action a while ago. So that's something.
That's great. And that might be a little bit of research and investigation. Where are folks that have, what are the trumped up charges? Where have the police moved from jaywalking to felony assaults and so forth? And doing that research and bringing that forward too, especially if we are in a position that is facing less oppression or less sort of direct attack, what can we do to prepare and provide that research and data and bring folks together, and then support folks who are already coming together around some of those charges and so forth. So I think it's a great way to, definitely something to think about and bring forward and see where are other folks organizing around that and what can we do to support and scaffold.
And
Yeah,
for
I'm
me-
sorry, we're running out of time. Well, we got 2 minutes. What you got, Ann?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, to me, that sounds like a frontline assembly, that definitely, there could be practices in there, however, which way, folks want to name it, but it's definitely needed. And it goes back to, our Southern Peoples Initiative of protecting and defending our people. That hits right at the core of that. So thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing. Good to see you.
Awesome. And just to tie it right before we leave out, but please put ideas and questions in the chat. And if we didn't get to them, let's come back around or hit us up for sure. But the Southern Movement Assembly 10 is happening in September, and these assemblies are going to be selecting delegations to represent y'all's visions, y'all's strategies, and bringing that into that larger movement assembly. We're excited about that process as a real form of regional movement governance. And we definitely want, everybody's input, ideas about how to make that work, how to make that feel real and bottom up and useful. In terms of coordinating across all these different sites, front lines, and geographies and people. And it came up last time, like conflict is going to emerge. Like there's going to be power dynamics. There's going to be all kinds of difficulties, disagreements as we move forward. How do we hold that and hold space for that and still align with the bigger purpose or handle it, and go right to each other and speak from a place of trust or the willingness to try to trust and to build that, which is not easy. So that's a big part of the vision as well. Awesome. So rich, y'all. Thank you for having this conversation, and hopefully it was useful.
Thanks, y'all.